Integrity Commission tabled in Parliament last week a report on the sale of rooms on the beach by Montego Beach 1975 Limited to Puerto Caribe Properties Limited and the sale of beachlands by the Urban Development Corporation to Puerto Caribe Properties Limited. This report has disclosed some very troubling findings and conclusions in relation to the conduct of the sale, which must give all well-thinking Jamaicans cause for concern. There are three fundamental issues which arise for our consideration. One is the issue of the value and the price at which the assets were sold. Second is the issue that relates to the procedures followed and whether these were in keeping with established governance policies and procedures of the government of Jamaica. And the third issue relates to the remedies to be applied in this situation. How are we going to correct the situation? I want to look at each of these issues in turn. The properties in question were valued by three recognized valuators in keeping with established procedures relating to the divestment of government-owned properties. They presented valuations for all the properties ranging from 11.8 million US to 13.5 million US dollars. However, all of the properties were sold for 7.2 million US dollars to the purchaser, which operates the Moon Palace Resort on the adjoining property. The price was therefore 4.6 million US dollars below the lowest valuation and 6.3 million US dollars below the highest valuation. The UDC has said that there was at the time, and I'm quoting from the report, strong interest from the private sector in the acquisition of the subject property for development as a high-end hotel, end quote. It is therefore reasonable to assume that the government could easily have obtained a price close to the higher valuation, more so from the entity already operating next door. We therefore maintain that the government gave away some 6.3 million US dollars, just short of 1 billion Jamaican dollars, or 47% of the value of this in-demand asset that was owned by the Jamaican people. And we must bear in mind that the valuations did not take account the value of the beachland, which was subsequently given as part of the deal to the purchasers. And so the discount is even greater than the 47% discount that the evidence points to. Much has been made of some, including the minister who took responsibility for the negotiations, according to the report, of the future benefits that were to be derived in terms of jobs and taxes, etc. Yet, there is no evidence offered that the country would not have had these investments or jobs or taxes if the property had been sold at the higher price. Nothing suggests, nothing in the evidence adduced in the report suggests that there was no one willing, or that the purchasers on record would not have been willing to pay the higher price. At the very minimum, had the property been tendered, then an opportunity to form a truer estimate of the actual market value would have been determined. Moreover, even if there are to be future benefits, what would the government stand to gain in a country which cannot afford adequate hospital beds, or desks for schools, or classrooms? What benefit could there be for a government to sell a property below the market price? How did we get here? We are in this position because the procedures set out in government policy for divestment and privatization were not followed. As the report discloses, Minister Daryl Vaz improperly inserted himself in the negotiations, apparently taking charge of it, and failed to optimize the value for the country's assets. The UDC board, it would appear, was a mere rubber stamp for the process, and the cabinet took decisions without the necessary and important input of the Ministry of Finance. When it did consider the recommendations, the Ministries of Finance's expressed concerns were not taken into account. Prime Minister Holness apparently supported and facilitated the minister's actions and indiscretions. The report reveals the following in respect of Minister Vaz's actions. He obtained copies of the valuations from the UDC and advised UDC management that he was negotiating with the purchaser. He gave consent for the additional beach land to be included in the sale without change to the price. He, along with the Prime Minister, agreed the final price and informed the UDC acting general manager to present it to the board. Minister Vaz's activities elicited the following conclusions of the Office of the Contractor General. The UDC was unable to negotiate freely, they said, and from a position of strength with Puerto Caribbean Properties, quote, because of the direct involvement of the Honorable Minister Daryl Vaz and other state agencies. The Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation, through the negotiation process, surrendered its position of strength, that is, to negotiate a price close to market value, but instead it did completely the opposite. And the behavior of the minister, we are asserting, is contrary to the established policy governing the role of ministers. The ministers and possibly the Prime Minister's role in the sale of these properties is a direct breach of the provisions of certain laws and the best practice in government relating to the separation of responsibilities between the political directorate and public administrators. In fact, the minister has in newspaper advertisements defiantly, and one might say arrogantly, confirmed his direct involvement. The Financial Administration and Audit Act specifically states that accounting officers are, in relation to their respective departments, responsible for the disposal of all government property. The Act further makes clear that a minister cannot be the accounting officer. In addition, the Urban Development Corporation Act specifically states that the responsible minister's main role, in this instance, it is the Prime Minister, is to give the UDC directions of a general character as to policy. It should also be noted, as I said, that Minister Vaz is not even the minister responsible in law for the UDC. These breaches of law and good governance principles cannot simply be ignored. The general privatization policy of the government that was last updated in 2017 states, and I quote, "The basic requirements for privatization transactions are that they must be transparent, at arm's length, and guided by market and economic valuations. In order to fulfill the requirement for transparency, entities to be privatized must be advertised in the print and electronic media," end quote. In fact, let me just say for the record, that what is provided for in the policy is that where there are unsolicited requests, that a government wanting to determine the true price or value of the request may use what is called the Swiss challenge mechanism, which is simply to put out by way of advertisement the terms on which an offer has been made and to ask other possible interested parties to match those terms. This was not pursued in this instance. Also, in pursuit of the requirement that the political directorate operate at arm's length and not be directly involved, successive governments have appointed enterprise teams to be responsible for divestments. Boards have done this also. In the case of Cayman Strack Limited, an enterprise team was appointed by the previous administration, and the divestment was concluded with the same enterprise team in the subsequent administration, because these were notable individuals from the public sector and the private sector who had expertise in these matters. Similarly, in the case of the recently privatized Norman Manley International Airport, an enterprise team was appointed to have conduct of the divestments. That approach was not followed in this matter. And I think I'd like to point to the simple fact that when the matter was brought to the cabinet in the first instance, there was objection raised by the Ministry of Finance, specifically in relation to the addition of beachlands without any change in price and about the variance with the valuations. The matter was not concluded, and then the matter was brought back to the cabinet without the Ministry of Finance's direct involvement. And we are told by the Prime Minister, quoted in the report, that he says the Ministry of Finance's considerations were subsequently taken into account in the final decision. But we must challenge this assertion. How did the final decision to include additional beachland valued at $3.5 million without any change in the price reflect the concerns of the Ministry of Finance about the UDC not receiving monetary compensation? And also, there is nothing in the cabinet decisions that has been spoken to reflected that there was any consideration of the views expressed through the Ministry of Finance by the international financial partners of the government of Jamaica that the government should not give up revenue, in this instance capital revenue, due to it. So it would appear on the face of it that the cabinet took a decision in this matter without a consideration of the views of the Ministry of Finance, which, mind you, is the main financial advisor to the Cabinet of Jamaica and the government of Jamaica. The Prime Minister must also let us know whether he was aware at all of Minister Vaz's activities in relation to this matter, including his participation in negotiations, or was the minister on a frolic of his own? What did the Prime Minister, as the minister responsible for the UDC, do about the fact that members of the UDC board, and I am quoting now, quote, expressed concern with the sale as well as the effect of decisions taken without the input of the board and the effect that that had on its effectiveness and on the corporation's balance sheet, end quote. In summary, the government failed to comply with the requirement to optimize the income from the divestment process in keeping with Section 2.2.7 of the Procedures Manual of the Government of Jamaica on Divestment. both the Prime Minister and Minister Vaz have sought to rely on an exception for where land is being divested for strategic purposes. Given the facts, however, there can be no justifiable reasons for a 47%, almost 1 billion, in fact more than 1 billion if the beach lands are taken into account, discount on the value of properties belonging to the people of Jamaica. Let me restate. These properties are in a highly sought-after area, prime beach land in the center of Ocherius. There was a strong interest, secondly, in the private sector to acquire it for high-end development. The fact that the property adjoining had an interest in the beach and in the adjoining properties would have conferred negotiating strength on the government, not weakness. And it is not a corporation that could not have found resources. They have multiple properties all over the world and in the Caribbean. Thirdly, a transparent exercise seeking competitive bids would have achieved the objective of finding a purchaser to undertake the same type of development on the adjoining property. Requiring development, performance, and employment creation as conditions for the disposal of its productive assets has been a policy of the UDC for decades. Whatever strategic considerations were in play could have been achieved without the heavy discount of 47% of the value of the property. Moon Palace would have had a special desire to acquire this adjoining property and the beach land which was leased to them. An astute negotiator for the government would have leveraged that fact to get maximum price for the property. For obvious reasons and certainly consistent with the Urban Development Corporation Act, it is not proper for a minister to be involved in negotiations for the sale of UDC assets. The Act specifically states that the responsible minister's main role, as we have said, is in relation to policy. So what is to be done? We support the recommendations of the Office of the Contractor General that an audit needs to be done. Given the public exchange of views between the now existing Integrity Commission, which includes the Auditor General, the Auditor General has already pronounced on this matter and therefore would be conflicted as the appropriate body to carry out such an independent audit. We therefore believe that an independent auditor needs to be selected to do this investigation. The independent auditor should be selected by a stakeholder group, which would include elements of the private sector, the National Integrity Action, Parliament, and our international financial partners. All of these should be part of the consultations which would select the auditor. Until an independent auditor is selected, and until the until the independent audit is complete, the responsible minister, the Honorable Daryl Vaz, should be sent on leave. It is also our view that given the contradictions arising from the actions of the National Integrity Commission, including the Auditor General and the Contractor General, former Contractor General, Parliament needs to undertake urgently the review of the enabling legislation that underlies the National Integrity Commission, and that the composition of the commission needs to be reviewed. In fact, the very provisions of the Act call for a review to be done within 5 years. We think, given this circumstance, it is very appropriate that such an audit be done, that such a review be done now. We also believe that it would be appropriate in the interim for the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee of Parliament to consider the circumstances surrounding the sale of this land and to have hearings on the matter. Thank you very much.